recording. So we had, go ahead, Tanai. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to uh, speak in
Oh,
discussion. I didn't.
yeah, go for it. Yeah, set it off.
So in my group, I had Brandon. I didn't actually. He was the only one speaking, so I wasn't sure if I had someone else in my group. But within our discussion, we kind of got cut off, and we were talking about the aspect of harmful spiritual possession. And then with Devonte, we were talking about how his spirit is rejecting the schooling. It's
Yep.
not necessarily saying like he's lacking intelligence. It's more so it's a it's a spiritual battle that he's consistently engaging in that's really not allowing him to maintain like being forced into the institution of schooling. And then when I don't want to speak for him because I know that he might also want to say the things that he had on his mind. But within that conversation, we also talked about how, for personally, possession of in schooling for me, it made me think of like the anxiety that I used to get in certain courses during schooling. And it made me wonder, is that like a form of possession? Is that, an attack on my spirit? Is that why I used to be filled with so much anxiety? And then it further made me think about how certain teachers, they were the shift between schooling and education, because certain teachers actually were able to like calm the spirit, kind of. It made me feel like I could actually, like I had a connection to the information that they were giving rather than just simply retaining it for a test or a pop quiz that might come up in class. Even more closely, my mom right now is an after school teacher. And she tells me she comes home every day because she has a love for helping children. That is her thing. She just wants to reach and help as many children as she can. And she has a lot of Black students in her class. And throughout the day, their teachers will call and say, like, what are you doing? Because you never have a problem with these students in your class, but I'm always having problems. And it's kind of like, well, you aren't treating these students like, like a person with respect. Because I've been in her classroom. Yeah, they're kids, they could be rowdy, but in the same instance, it's their kids. They're not like, it's not like you're talking to an animal that you're trying to train. Like, this is a child, this is somebody's child. And they take the information that they find interesting.
Yeah.
That's the thing with children. You can't, like, a child is not going to sit up there and just BS with you. If they feel like what you're saying is some nonsense, it's going to be some nonsense. And they're not going to, you can't grasp a child's attention unless what you're saying, unless you're inflicting fear, or unless you're actually like grasping interest. And it I don't know, it really made me think about it like on a broader level when students interact with these teachers, just like how, I don't think everyone's meant to be a parent. I don't think a lot of these teachers are meant to be teachers because they're not educating. They're putting these students through the institution of schooling. And, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you, Tanai. Who else would like to share?
I can share.
Sure.
I thought what was really interesting about the reading was the whole way it used Get Out as a way to explain how it's like the movie was like not a way to get out of like ghetto or get out of sift or like get out of where they're like Devon, or I don't know how to explain it. Like people think like to get out of where people are whereas people are at, but it's really to get away from schools and institutions and like Tanaya said, places that are taking that spiritual possession from African Americans. So that's what I thought, that whole Get Out analogy was interesting to me.
Yeah, and I would also argue, Sulian Seppi, that's the thesis of the article, right? Good call out. Irasimi?
I was gonna say something about number 3. That
Okay.
it says, "Have you been possessed by schooling?" I think we all went through some such a possession of schooling by having professor who thinks different way, and by reading the books that it wrote by white people only. They want you to think in a way where they use learning as a way of changing your mind, the way you thought. So I think we all went through, even though one can say, "Oh, I didn't go through that," and I think we all went through that at one point in our life.
I agree. I think that's a very profoundly astute observation, in the sense that, right, if you're engaging these textbooks and you're doing the work to be a successful student, then you have been in the process of that possession. And I think you're spot on. Anyone else before we move on to my notes?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Zach.
Okay, so it kind of reminded me of a few things I've been noticing. Like the other day I was on Instagram and this girl was forced to take out her beads, like to play softball or like to play in like her sport. And she was saying that she felt dehumanized because, they're all like, it's like they do it in school too. It's like the Muslim women can't wear the hijabs. They wipe your culture away.
Yeah.
And then it's like, especially for African Americans, like there's so many things that we can and can't do that it's less about like the education and more about forming you to be how they want you to be.
Yeah.
And that's just something that stood out to me the most.
Yeah, great call out. Yeah, and it's funny because like there has been laws set in place that are supposed to prevent those type of things from happening. I believe it's called the Crown Act, right? So how does institutions like schools be able to circumvent or move around something that's a law, a federal law at that? So that's a very, very good call out, Zoe. Thank you. All right. So if there's no one else, I'll start working through my notes. And as y'all know, right, like I like to kind of deal with the beginning of the text. And another thing that's kind of interesting, they provide you like the abstract, then they provide you with like a brief synopsis of the film Get Out to help you kind of understand what they're up to as it pertains to the actual article itself. I'm going to start with the actual article itself. I'm not going to deal with the abstract. I'm not going to deal with the film. I'm sure most of you have seen the film. But they state a very clear objective, right? And they say that the current objective of the work is to recalibrate, if not dismantle, current notions of African-American student success that are often defined or positioned as going to college and graduating, right? So if you're paying close attention to that statement, right, the authors of this text have a problem with I have a problem with understanding academic success as going to college and graduating from college, right? They say that should not be understood as academic success. They want to recalibrate or dismantle that notion, okay? So one of the things to think about as it pertains to that statement is that this article is going to serve as either a critique, right? We're critiquing the idea that going to college and graduating from college is success, or we're going to serve as a corrective, right? I'm going to correct the idea that going to college and getting a degree is academic success, okay? And it says that schooling, right, as a system, as an institution that by design, right, is designed to commit cultural genocide. So this is exactly what Zoet is saying. Is designed by definition to strip the cultural specificity from you and make you a good American, right? And that's why when you start class, you pledge allegiance, right? It kind of lets you know what project you're going to get into as it pertains to this socialization process that we call schooling. The authors dive into the work of John Ogbu. We should be familiar with John Ogbu's work because we have engaged his work throughout the semester. Also, when we previously engaged Ogbu, it was a critique of Ogbu's work. And again, the author of this text is saying that Ogbu is conflating the idea of schooling and education. And in fact, students have an issue with schooling, not an issue with education. The authors also use post-traumatic slave syndrome, transgenerational transmission of trauma, and epigenetics, right? And these are all ways in which trauma gets passed down, okay? And he says that they lay the groundwork for future scholars who study harmful spirit possession as the search for plausible explanations to epigenetics, to transgenerational transmission of trauma and post-traumatic slave disorder. They're saying that it may be the spirit that is the mechanism that's passing this trauma from one generation on to the next, right? So we're offering post-traumatic slave disorder, we're offering epigenetics, we're offering the transgenerational transmission of trauma as a site of investigation to look into the ways that the spirit can be used as a conduit to pass these traumas down from one generation to the next. This work is also informed by the work of Carter G. Woodson, his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, right? And the main argument, the main thesis of the miseducation of the Negro is the more successful you are in schooling, the more alienated and isolated you become from your own community, i.e. the more white you become, right? And it says, and he also uses the work of Malidoma Patrice Somé, the text of Water and the Spirit, to articulate this fact. For those unfamiliar with the text, Malidoma, the protagonist, is raised in the Dagara society in West Africa. He's kidnapped by a French Jesuit priest, I believe for 10 to 12 years. He's raised in the missionary school. He gets into a fight with the priest, runs away from the missionary school and returns home. Because of his time learning the schooling system of the white man, when he returns home, his elders say that he has not returned home, right? He says a white man has returned home in Malidoma's body, right? So if you're thinking about this very carefully, that is an articulation of a spirit possession, right? Because as the article defines, right, the spirit possession is one entity taking over the body of another entity. And for the elders of the Dagara society, when they viewed Malidoma upon his return, they seen a white spirit manipulating, moving through the case or the shell that is Malidoma's body, right? Then they asked a very profound question dealing with the likes of Devante, right? How would we view indicators such as maladaptive behavior, things like sagging, things like getting kicked out of class, things like poor test scores and high dropout rates, right? How would we view that when we're looking at this metaphor that's being used of the lion and the hunter, right? And if we want the lion to remain a lion, how would we look at things that like dropping out of school, like ditching class, like getting poor test scores? Is that something that's allowing this lion to remain a lion? Is that indicative of this lion in effect saying, fuck school, right? And I'm gonna do what I need to do to keep my lion essence, right? And this also allows us to resituate how we view success, right? In fact, the article's title is imploring us to think about removing ourselves from these institutions to get out, right? And this, in fact, may be the only way to avoid these harmful spirit possessions. So I'll put a pause in my notes there. We'll transition into our fishbowl. We could talk about what's discussed in my notes. We could talk about what was discussed in your breakout rooms, or you could read from your journal. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer for the fishbowl? Okay, Mohammed, got you. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? and Zoet. Got you. Thank you. We'll get one more. If not, I'll call on somebody. Okay.
I can go.
All right, Brandon, we'll go with you, sir. Thank you. So we'll go with Muhammad, Zoet, and Brandon. Whoever would like to start us off, it's on you.
I kind of want to build off of what you were just talking about with the Lions quote,
Uh-huh.
because I was just reading that one. It kind of makes me think. I remember when uniforms became a thing in public schools, like especially where I grew up in Indiana. It was because boys were sagging,
Mhm.
or girls' shirts were too low, or their skirts were too small, and it's like it goes back to like even the movie how Black women are being sexualized, for example. It just became a thing outside of education.
Mhm.
So it's like, why does a boy sagging his pants have anything to do with his capability of learning? Or like the nicknames they mentioned in the reading, like they associate tattoos or like grills and like chains, and it's like that's just people being who they are.
Yeah.
Like no one's talking about like white people and like the things that they do, you know what I mean? It's like they only target the African American people, like the braids, the beads. It's like that has nothing to do with their effectiveness and what they want to do, their work, their sport, their school. And it's like they tied it in so much that now when people think of tattoos and grills, they just think of a Black person that has no future, or like, oh, it's just another statistic, another number. Like they belittled it that much that that's just what people think. And it's just not. It's obviously not right, but that's just something I got from that quote for sure.
Yeah.
It made me think about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Zoet. Who's next?
I can go.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon.
So I wanted to go back to the conversation me and Tanaya had in our breakout room, and I kind of started to. She said some things that kind of got me relating it back to like my personal life, and then the movie Get Out, and so there's the part where they talk about the Armitage family and the techniques that they use, right? So they talk about the coagula, or the procedure that implants the consciousness, mind, and spirit of the being into the body of another. And it kind of reminded me of when my grandmother used to teach. She was a special needs teacher years ago, and most of those kids I grew up with. And yeah, most of them either in and out of jail or became gang members. Some of them really successful. But it got me thinking that, because Tanaya mentioned that it was our spirits battling this like educational system. And so because our spirits were battling the educational system, they turned around and removed these kids from a normal classroom and put them in this special needs class to kind of get them like out of sight, out of mind. And I thought that was a way of them trying to impose their harmful spirit possession on these kids that didn't necessarily have anything wrong, or didn't necessarily have anything special as far as educational wise, that they needed the extra learning or anything of that sort. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and that kind of also creates traumatic events for kids as they grow older.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to circle back to that because you bring up some really good points, but I want to let Muhammad go. Thank you, Brandon.
So for me, I think the main idea was when a student goes to an educational institution, they're being reconfigured to the way the educational institution works. Just wanted to ask you this. Is it like really department specific, or it works in like for certain majors, or it's like entirely like how the educational system works? Because I have had like experiences like in my because I'm studying engineering there, I didn't feel that thing like they're trying to it's just like based on my experiences, of course, but it's just like I didn't feel like they're trying to change anything like in my thought process, because I have some of my education back from my country. So I felt like rather the techniques were like a little new, like the things work. But when I took some courses, like upper division courses in the history department, I felt a little out of the box or a little different. So just wanted to ask you that if these experiences are like major specific or it happens like all over.
That's a really good question. So one, the article is more so focused on the K through 12 experience, right? And then if anything, it would be like your general education standpoint in college. Once you get into like your upper division or your graduate level, it is more discipline specified, right? So things like engineering, things like mathematics, they may not be so prone to the spirit possession because those are like schools of thought that are considered to be universal, right? Like how do you manipulate numbers to be
Exactly.
you know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
And I would say the same with engineering, like that's just an approach to solving issues or approach to building things. I mean, you can't really racially classify any of that information. Science is one that it kind of sits at a very interesting intersection, and it depends on how and who's doing the science and what and to what aims, but it could very well lead to these type of harmful spirit possessions, if you will. But then it also could be neutral, right? So it is definitely discipline specific when you get into your higher echelons of education or academia. But I think the article itself, and I can't say I know the article, they're dealing more so with the K through 12 or K through what we may call 14 experience.
Just wanted to ask you more because you are pursuing a PhD. So let's say if I think to pursue a PhD on my field, do you think that the same experiences will be encountered by me as you are encountering in terms of like breaking down
So no, intellectually, Mohammed, right? So I don't think like the material and the information that you engage as an engineer would kind of promote the same type of harmful information that I had to come across dealing with things like Western philosophy, right? But where you may experience it in your PhD or master's is how you move through space, right? And so, for example, when I first got to Claremont, actually, I hadn't even been admitted yet. I was thinking about applying, and I had an appointment with a professor up at the university to kind of get a better sense of the campus and the culture on the campus, right? And when I went into the office to let them know I'm here for an appointment, the dude at the office just so happened to occupy a white body. He looked at me like, bro, you don't belong in this motherfucker. What you doing here, right? So I would say those type of things, like how you move through space, you may experience that, but I don't believe, and I could be wrong, right? But I don't believe far as the information you'll engage as an engineer would be harmful. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so not like the information itself, but probably the reactions or the way you get treated by other people in the department. Okay, thank you.
Microaggressions and things like that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, good question. Tanaya, you had your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to touch on two things actually. The first one being when you were talking about science and like people that major in science and become scientists in like different aspects of information. And my other not psychology course. In my other Pan-African study course, it is based in psychology. There was a chapter earlier in the semester when we were talking about how science was used to back up slavery. And how they took pieces of science and basically like things like you see their nose is smaller and their lips are wider, things like that, to say, you know, they're inferior. The race is inferior. So it just makes me think, like, even when the information doesn't support the racism, it is misconstrued and used to support someone's agenda. Because when you look, like, this is with any statistics, whether or not it supports or whether or not it sheds like a bad light on Black people, a statistic is a statistic and you can't change that. But like scientific facts that relate to people's genes and people's genetic makeup, those I don't like, I still can't grasp my mind around how people took that information that, yeah, he has a big nose, so he's not like, it wasn't that simple, but yeah, he has a big nose, so he's not, as smart as us, and ran with it.
Yeah.
They took that information and ran with it, because prior to that, it wasn't people that were split up based on race. They were split up based on class.
Mhm.
There were millionaire Black people, there were millionaire white people, but there were also poor white people. And poor white people were the people that took that information. That's also what I learned from that other course. So it's far deeper than just, I don't like Black people. No, it's far deeper than that. It's not just you not liking Black people. It's you knowing that your history, you come from white people who are not wealthy, and they were not economically in a position to be in power until this new science came forth with, obviously nowadays we look at it and we're like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But with that information, that's what you grasped onto. It's just, it is just ridiculous. And then my second point was microaggressions. I had never fully experienced a microaggression until I went to dinner with my mom the other day. I'd never seen it and felt it and was able to fully recognize it in the room. We went to Chili's. There's maybe, including us, 7 families in the restaurant. So fairly empty. They got about 7 servers. So realistically, no one should be waiting. And the 2 Black families, my family and then a couple, were sitting across from each other, diagonal to each other. Whole time we're waiting extra long for our food. When my food came out, the lady who was supposed to bring my food sat and had a 30-minute conversation with the people sitting behind us. And then my mom called her to ask for help. She kept walking, she just didn't hear her. Then she comes back with the food, and she had said something along the lines of oh, if you guys were having any trouble, I wish you would have called me. So, that was where you drew the line. My mom was like, I did call you and you ignored me. And then it was, my mom ordered a drink. Within the first 10 minutes of going to any restaurant, you would think, okay, at least I could have my drink. She didn't have the drink, the whole meal. I had to go to the bar and tell them, my mom ordered a drink about 25 minutes ago, and nobody's came and brought it to her. And I had to bring it to her. I'm not a server. But it just made me think, you guys know what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's not simple mistakes that you're making, because there's not a lot of us in here. And a lot of these people are already eating. So it logically, you would think that they would tend to the people that are trying to get some food in their system or something. But it just, I don't know, it was a weird experience for me to even pick up on it. I was like, wow, even if it's unintentional, it's intentional. You see what you're doing and you know that it's making someone uncomfortable. And then when they call you out on it, it's, I had no idea. Yes, you did. You literally did. There's not a lot of people in here. It's not packed. You don't have a line out the door. You don't have people with reservations coming in. These 7 families are just leaving, and it's becoming less and less. There aren't more people coming into the establishment. So it's ridiculous when you actually get to see it and it's right in your face and you're like, wow, I have power, but I also am sort of powerless in this situation.
Yeah. Thank you, Tanaya. Irisemi?
I was gonna ask you, you mentioned about the education K to 14. Is that K to 12 plus 2-year college or?
Yeah, so
Oh, okay.
junior college, yep, exactly.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Should have been clear about that. Autumn?
Oh yeah. I just when she said Erisimi said K through 14, it made me think about college too, because I went to Santa Monica, and that I now that I think about it, there were also times where I felt uncomfortable. Like if I took a history class and we talked about slavery, and usually I'm the only Black person in the class because I don't know what courses everybody took, but I knew there were other like Black people there, but
That's
I
not
just
Monica.
never had them in my course.
Yeah.
And everybody would turn and look at me when we talked about slavery. That always made me uncomfortable because it's like, why is it? Like I sat in the back. Everybody breaks their neck just to look at me. Like, what am I gonna say? Like
Yeah.
that just used to always make me like so uncomfortable. Or when we talked about ebonics and the professor calls on me specifically and like, oh, can you help us with this example? Like you saying that
Nah,
like I know
right.
all ebonics, like I'm supposed to know, like I don't understand. Like
Yeah.
but yeah, that was the point I wanted to make. But I also wanted to piggyback off of um Tanaya when she was talking about science and how people used like how people use things that they said in science to kind of like motivate their racial beliefs because of features and characteristics and things like that. And I learned earlier in the year that in for like Black people in science that their opinions were considered invalid because they didn't have the same idea about racism as white people did. So when it came to other topics, they didn't take what they said into consideration. And I thought that was really interesting because in my other class we talk about Darwin and how Darwin's theory you like it's supposed to be based off of people's experience. And it's like, how can you take only one like demographic and base their experience to, you know, make the theory valid, but not take everybody's, since it's supposed to be a collection of experiences. And I was like, it just was so strange that only Black people's, you know, like ideas were invalid. Not no other race, only because of the racism that we have different beliefs. And I'm like, but so like, what do they want us to say?
They don't want to say nothing. That's it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want a couple of things with the time that we have left. One, because both you and both Adam and Tanaya are talking about this what they call, it's really a pseudoscience, right? It's a fake science. It's a science that has proven to be debunked. It's called eugenics. This idea that intelligence is based off size of the cranium and things of that nature, but it has been situated as a false or science or a pseudoscience. Two, I want to talk about, and I know we're really short on time. One, the solution that's offered, right, to get out, and I want to use that as a conduit to give you your homework assignment. So, what the article is arguing, right? Dr. Bush, his brother, and myself is arguing to get out of these institutions, right? To look into independent African institutions that will educate you and not school you, right? Another way to think about this spirit possession is the activity of code switching, right? So when you code switch, if we are to work through the article, you're allowing that harmful spirit to occupy your body for a moment to allow you to navigate whatever space you're trying to navigate. So for those who, if you want to think about it, you're going to do an interview, right? You're going to code switch to seem professional, right? So that way you're able to get the job. So again, if you're going to use that example and work it through the article, you're going to allow that spirit of professionalism, right, to possess you during that interview. So that way you can be afforded access to the opportunity of employment, right? So this is how we could kind of think about this code switching and think about how spirit possession kind of work in tandem, right? So with that being said, and Tanaya, you'll be familiar with this because you had my class before, but my homework for you is to, when you normally code switch, when you normally allow that spirit to occupy you so you can safely navigate through spaces, don't do it. Get out. Allow your natural self to be. And when you do this, right, I want you, one, to first be attentive to how you feel. How does not code switching make you feel? And then two, be attentive to those around you and see how they respond to your authentic self. Okay, that's your homework assignment. But I'm gonna provide like a criteria, right? Like, don't do anything that will get you fired from your job. Like, don't code switch to a point to where you don't have employment when you come back next week. Don't code switch to a point that you're getting your ass whooped. Like, be smart about the way you're going to execute this assignment. But I want you to push against these borders and these constraints that make you feel that you cannot be your authentic self in certain spaces. Does anyone have questions about your homework assignment?
Are you gonna post it?
I just gave it to you, bro. Just
Okay.
don't code switch. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is that write in a journal, a summary, or what is it?
So,
How just write it?
no, we're going to talk about it. So when we come back next Wednesday, I'm going to ask you how your code switching. Actually, you know what? I like that. Let's do a journal entry for it. So please do a journal entry about your experience with code switching. And then we'll also have a discussion about how your project or that assignment went. Does everyone understand what code switching is? Because you have to understand code switching to do the assignment. Does anyone have any questions around that? Okay, good.
I'll need a little more clarity on that, but I'll stay after class.
I can do it real quick because you might not be the only one. So one way that you could code switch is linguistically, right? So you may be bilingual and you will not speak, let's just say, Spanish in a certain area because you don't want to feel ostracized, right? So you'll make sure that you're going to use English. You're going to code switch to English in this particular space. So what I'm asking you to do is, instead of going to English, just continue to use your Spanish and see what happens. Another way of thinking about code switching is the attire that you may wear. You may not wear a hoodie in a certain environment just because you feel like that's not appropriate, right? Wear that hoodie and see what happens. You know, maybe you have like an ethnic garb that you would only break out at certain occasions, right? Wear that ethnic garb and see what happens. Does that make a little bit more sense for you, Mohammed?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So that's what
That's include attitude and behaviors, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Acting in a way that you're not act normally in
Exactly.
everyday life.
Yep.
Okay.
So for Black folks, we have the work voice that we put on to make sure we sound professional, right? Like, fuck that, don't do that. Talk normal, but don't get fired, right? That's also the don't get fired and don't get your ass whooped. And I thank you, Erisemi. That's a really good point. I'm going to ask for you to journal about that, and then we'll discuss that when we meet next week. For your homework, as far as the material, right? I don't have anything posted for you by the end of day tomorrow. I'll have some interviews that we'll watch. If you notice, we have no more readings for the rest of the semester. We're going to just kind of engage interviews and conversations for our material going forward, focusing on Malcolm X, Tupac Shakur, and Nipsey Hussle will be kind of the three figures that we'll investigate as they depict their versions of manhood. So I'll post that to the Google Classroom site and I'll email that out to you all. Again, remember tonight at 6 p.m., the third installment of Bolo Kaja, dealing with melanin, media, and representation. Sister Amina, Brother Mobolaji, and Dr. Libby Lewis will be our moderator for that discourse. So if you can make it, please do. And it will be posted on the campus website to revisit if you are not able to attend, and I'll still offer extra credit for that. Does anyone else have any last minute